Hello everyone, my name is Anurag. I secured All India Rank 6 in the Indian Forest Service Exam 2019. In this video, I'll be providing a strategy for my optionals, Zoology and Forestry. A little bit about my background. I finished the integrated bachelor's and master's in science from IISER Pune in 2015. After that, I worked for about a year at the National Center for Biological Sciences in Bangalore, and then for about 6 months at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology and Science, ETH Zurich. After that, I left that position, and since then, I've been preparing for pretty much exclusively for the Indian Forest Services. And my optionals were Zoology and Forestry. I would like to mention here that even though I had a degree in biology, the courses for zoology and forestry were quite new to me, especially what is expected from you in the IFoS mains curriculum. So let's start with zoology. Uh, for people who have a background like a BSc in zoology, I think it makes entire sense to choose zoology as an optional, whether for IFoS or for the civil service exam. And even if you have a background in biology in 11th and 12th, you can still choose zoology as optional, but you would have to put in a lot more effort in this case. Let's just go into the pros and cons of having zoology as an optional. The advantages, first of all, is it's a high scoring optional, and if you prepare well, you can get easily 70 to 75% marks of the total. And the questions in zoology so far have been quite predictable, and there are a very few topics across different papers that keep getting repeated every single year. So if you prepare even just the previous year questions well, there is a good chance you can answer 60 to 70% of the questions very well. And however, there are a few disadvantages of choosing this optional. First of all, if you are a civil services aspirant, it does not overlap much with any of the GS papers, maybe just a little bit with the environment section, but again, that's really not worth taking zoology optional for. Secondly, there's a vast syllabus to this topic, and you'd need multiple revisions to remember the different specific names, like names of proteins and names of pathways, etc., properly. But having said that, let's just go into strategy for zoology. I believe it's very important in this subject to prepare your own notes, because there are many books in the market, but there is no consolidated material available. And for a subject like this, you need multiple revisions right before the exam. If you have, let's say, 2 days before the exam, generally for civil service, you have about 4 days between your GS papers and the optional, and for IFoS now you have about, depending on what your other optional is, 1 or 2 days. And your goal ideally should be to have a glance at everything in the syllabus during this gap, and for that I can't see any other way than preparing your own notes. Secondly, the syllabus is really vast, but you should not lose track of the previous year question areas and the keywords in the syllabus at any point of time in your preparation. There are a lot of books that people refer to, Leninger's Biochemistry, Voigt and Voigt, then Townsend's Ecology, Guyton and Hall for Physiology. But personally, I did not refer to any of them. I mostly use SlideShare to pick out the topics, because I felt the exam does not demand a very huge level of detail, and whatever was available on SlideShare was pretty much enough to answer the kind of questions. So basically, I would check the previous year questions and the syllabus, make a list of things that I would need to learn about. I'll just Google, let's say, structure of nephron, space SlideShare, and you have slides from around the world, which almost always gave whatever was needed for the exam. Apart from this, notes on zoology website also helps a lot. There's also a website called IAS Zoology, which is useful if you are preparing notes. And So the whole purpose of making notes for me was I don't ever have to refer to these original sources again. But I also prepared very short diagrammatic, very like extremely short notes that I could revise just before the exam, and these consisted mostly of the priority areas from the previous year questions, because this pretty much forms 70% of the questions, like I had mentioned before. Now, you also have evolution notes in the market, but I found them quite unhelpful, putting it mildly, and I never referred back to them again after they're still lying at home. Coming to answer writing, zoology answer should be concise, and you should be using a diagram in every single answer. If you have sometimes you might not have enough time, and you would have to choose between writing text or drawing a diagram, and in such a scenario always choose to draw the diagram. And you can maybe make sure it's labeled, of course, and you can maybe scribble a few lines of text around the diagram, and that should really fetch you just about as much marks as you would have if you had written some additional text. And secondly, focus on completing your paper, because the answers would be lengthy in this optional. Apart from that, good handwriting and good diagrams of course help. So try to make sure the diagrams are always legible, and of course always well labeled. Well labeled diagram is pretty much the key takeaway for zoology optionals. Then let's come to forestry. Forestry is an optional which is probably chosen by 70 to 80% of people who write the mains, and there are a few very obvious advantages of choosing forestry. First would be it's probably the least bulky of all the optional subjects. Even though I had a little bit of background in zoology and nothing in forestry, still the forestry syllabus took me much lesser time to complete than zoology overall. Secondly, almost all the aspirants have one holy forestry Bible called the book by Manikandan and Prabhu, and this book should be read cover to cover. And because almost everyone, apart from those who have a very technical background in forestry, all the non-forestry graduates read this book, so you need to ensure that you are thorough with this book to stay ahead of the competition. Recently, in the last 2 or 3 years, the number of questions from outside this book are increasing, but again, like I had mentioned, you just need to stay ahead of your peers who you are competing with. Then forestry again is a subject that is asked heavily in your interview when you make it to that stage. There is a person in the panel who will ask you questions on environment, forestry, etc. And if you have forestry optional, it just becomes a lot easier to answer those. Coming to how to write answers in forestry, I don't have a lot of experience in the forestry technical details, but here I can share what I did, and maybe I'll share my marks later. I don't know them yet in the video description. So again, like in zoology, make sure you're writing answers in a precise way. Try to incorporate things like diagrams, scientific names of the trees, technical forestry terms. Then you should also, for certain subjects like mensuration, you should know the instrument names. And then again, you need to have idea about the scientific names of trees that are used in various aspects of forestry, like in certain types of silviculture, for reclaiming certain kinds of problem soils, etc. And for both of the optional zoology and forestry, I have prepared a short write-up about how you should give specific attention to each single topic in the different sections of both the papers. I'll be sharing that PDF in the video description.